Welcome back, my YouTube channel, Leap Inspire. They called her a burden, her own flesh and blood, the children she had carried, fed, and sacrificed everything for, stood at her door one rainy evening and told her to leave. But what they did not know, what they could never have imagined, was that the old woman walking away from that house with nothing but a worn cloth on her back was carrying a secret powerful enough to change all of their lives forever. Her name was Mama Adaeze, and this is her story. Mama Adaeze lived in the village of Ebute, a small but proud community nestled between red clay hills and a wide river that the elders said had been flowing since before memory began. She was 63 years old, with silver locks past her shoulders, hands that told the story of a lifetime of work, and eyes that carried both sorrow and a quiet, unshakable peace. She had raised 4 children entirely on her own. Her husband, Chukwuemeka, had died young, taken by fever when their youngest, Kelechi, was barely 2 years old. From that day forward, Mama Adaeze became both mother and father. She woke before the sun every morning, farmed the land, sold vegetables at the market, took in sewing work at night, and made sure every one of her children went to school with clean uniforms and full stomachs. She never complained, not once, not even on the nights when there was nothing left to eat and she quietly told her children she had already eaten, watching them finish the last of the food while she went to bed with an empty stomach. Her eldest was Emeka, serious, ambitious, determined to become wealthy. Her daughter Ngozi, beautiful, proud, obsessed with status. Tobena, quiet but easily led by whoever stood nearest. And Kelechi, her youngest, her last, the one born just before grief swallowed their household whole. For years, the family struggled together. Mama Adaeze held them all like a woman holds water in her palms, carefully, completely, knowing that if she loosened even one finger, everything would spill. Then, slowly, one by one, her children grew up and left. Emeka got a government job in the city and married Chidinma, a woman who believed a man's mother was a threat to his marriage. Ngozi married a wealthy businessman and grew ashamed of where she came from. Tobena followed Emeka and did whatever his brother told him. Kelechi became a driver for a wealthy family and barely found time to visit. At first, they sent money occasionally, then occasionally became rarely, then rarely became never. Mama Adaeze continued living alone in the old family compound, farming what she could, eating what the land gave her, telling herself her children were busy, that they had their own lives, that this was the way of things. She never called to ask for anything, she never made them feel guilty. She simply lived quietly and prayed for each of them by name every single morning. But then her body began to fail her. It started with her knees, then her back, then a persistent cough that needed proper hospital treatment. Without the ability to farm, her income disappeared. She began eating once a day, then sometimes once every 2 days. A neighbor named Mama Chisam noticed and began leaving food quietly at her gate, a small act of mercy that kept the old woman alive through the hardest months. When word reached Emeka that their mother was sick and struggling, he called a family meeting. Mama Adaeze waited hopefully, thinking her children were coming to help. Instead, what happened next broke something inside her that had never been broken before, not by poverty, not by widowhood, not by years of silent sacrifice. They came on a rainy Thursday evening, all 4 of them. Emeka in his pressed city clothes, Ngozi in her expensive fabric, Tobena looking at the floor, and Kelechi standing slightly apart, unable to meet her mother's eyes. Emeka spoke first, calm and businesslike, as if conducting a transaction rather than speaking to the woman who had starved herself so that he could eat. "Mama," he said, "this compound is old. It needs too much money to repair. We have decided it is best if you go and live with your sister in Asaba." Mama Araeze stared at her firstborn. She said, "This is the house your father built. This is where I raised all of you." "Things have changed, Mama," Ngozi said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty of someone who has convinced themselves they are being reasonable. "We have our own families now. We cannot be responsible for two households. I am not asking you to maintain two households. I am simply asking not to be removed from my own home." Tobena said nothing. He studied his shoes. Kelechi opened his mouth once, then closed it. "Mama, we have decided," Emeka said with finality. "You will leave by the end of the week." Mama Araeze looked at each of her children slowly. She looked at Emeka, born during a thunderstorm, whose first cry had been the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, at Ngozi, whose long braids she had plaited every morning for 12 years, at Tobena, who used to press his small face against her arm during nightmares, and Kelechi, her youngest, her last, the one born just before grief swallowed their household whole. Then she stood up slowly, with great dignity, wrapped her cloth around herself, and walked to her room. She did not cry that night. She had finished with crying a long time ago. By the end of the week, Mama Araeze packed a small bag, a few wrappers, her Bible, a photograph of Chukwuemeka, and one small wrapped item she placed carefully at the very bottom and covered with her Sunday wrapper. She did not go to Asaba. Instead, she walked to the edge of the village where Mama Nkechi, a childhood friend, had a small room behind her house. Mama Nkechi took her in without a single question. Word spread quickly through Ebute. In African villages, nothing travels faster than a story about a mother who has been wronged. Market women talked. Elders shook their heads. Some stopped greeting Emeka's family when they visited. But Mama Araeze said nothing against her children, not one word. When people came with sympathy and anger on her behalf, she simply said, "They are still my children. God will sort what I cannot." Those words confused people. How could a woman treated so cruelly speak with such peace? The answer was in that small wrapped item at the bottom of her bag. Years ago, long before her children were born, Mama Araeze's father, a man of great wisdom, had taken her aside and told her something important. Their family owned land, not just the family compound, but a vast stretch on the other side of the river that the government had never properly registered and that most people in the village had completely forgotten. "This land will be worth something one day," he told her. "Protect the documents. Tell no one. Wait for the right time." Mama Araeze kept that secret through marriage, through widowhood, through raising 4 children on almost nothing. The documents had sat at the bottom of her bag her entire life. She had never told a soul. But now, sitting in her small borrowed room, she began to think the right time had finally come. A few weeks after leaving the compound, a government development official arrived in Ebute. The village had been selected for a major infrastructure project, a new road, a bridge, and a community center. And the land they needed was on the other side of the river, the land that belonged to Mama Araeze. When the official went to the village head to discuss ownership, no one could identify the rightful owner. He announced that if no verified owner came forward within 30 days with proper documentation, the government would proceed and compensate the village collectively. It was Mama Chisam who heard this at the market and ran immediately to tell Mama Araeze. Mama Araeze listened calmly. Then she reached into her bag, unwrapped the small cloth package and placed the documents on the table. Old but intact, properly signed. Her father had been a careful man. The next morning, she walked into the village head's compound and placed those documents in front of the government official. The silence that followed lasted a very long time. The land was valued at an amount that made the official read the number twice. It was worth more than everything in the entire village combined. The project could not proceed without Mama Araeze's agreement. Suddenly, the quiet old woman her own children had thrown out of her home was the most important person in all of Ebute. News reached the city within hours. Emeka received the call from the village head and sat very still for several minutes. Then he called Ngozi, then Tobena, and finally Kelechi, who, unlike his siblings, did not immediately calculate what